Officer Alexander, and I am a Knight Pelican, and I'm the newcomer officer for the Kingdom of the Outlands. I just wanted to say that traditionally, the Chatelaine position, we used to be called Hospitalers. It was kind of the person that would be on the side of the field at fighter practices, and they would go and greet new people. Maybe they carried around garb, which we call gold key. Maybe they helped set up demos, but they were kind of just like this person, and it's like, oh, it's your job to be the newcomer greeter. But I think that a lot of things have changed. So one, I think that everybody needs to be hospitable. So that's kind of the mark of a noble. It's a mark for our peers in the SCA, hospitality. So I kind of believe that anybody, especially if you're a lord or lady in the SCA, you need to be practiced at being hospitable and being able to walk up and welcome anybody into the SCA. So I call that the Outlands welcome, where instead of just going to an event and looking around at who you know and talking with your friends, you actually take a moment to look around and see who you don't know, go up and introduce yourself, find out a little bit of what their interest is, and then if they are newer, go and introduce them to somebody else that might connect to their interest. So I'm calling that the Outlands welcome, so that people shouldn't show up to an event and not have anybody talk to them. They should have several people going, hello, I don't believe we know each other. So welcoming people to the Outlands. So then the question is what is the Chatelaine position? So during COVID, a lot of the membership of the SCA has gone down. And so there's been a real focus on, what are we doing as far as all of these things? And so the office of the Chatelaine has actually grown to encompass more things and bigger things. So that's what I'm going to just talk about a little bit. So in the Outlands, we're calling it ROAR. So you can kind of see my board back here. So recruitment, orientation, retention, and re-engagement. So recruitment. So first thing I want to say though is this is a big job, all of these things. So in the modern world, those are called membership specialists, and they have like teams, and they do all these things, and they get paid to run the membership of their group. So almost the concept of just having one newcomer person for a group, to me, is a little dated. That we really need teams of people, because this involves all kinds of things, and it's a little, I think, overwhelming just for one person. So the more people we can pull in, either as deputies or as a team or however we want to arrange it, the better. So recruitment. This to me involves a lot of different things. So it involves marketing, right? So being able to talk to your web minister, looking at your website, is it newcomer friendly? One of the biggest things I've noticed lately is that if you go to a website and you're a new person, the lingo on the website, I wouldn't understand any of it. I don't know what a seneschal is. I certainly don't know what a chatelaine is. Actually, people in the SCA often don't know what a chatelaine is. So if it's listed chatelaine and then the newcomer persons, if they just have their SCA name, I usually can't pronounce that either. So I don't know that this is the newcomer person, and I don't know how to pronounce their name. So it makes it very difficult, like who do I contact? So re-looking at our websites and talking to our web ministers to see how do we make this more newcomer friendly, because right now they're kind of based, or they're used for members. Our newsletters, is it easy to connect to a newsletter? Can it be used to help with pulling our newcomers in and getting them engaged? Social media, do we have pages so that that's kind of our outward face and it helps people to connect to the SCA? Once again, can they understand the lingo on there? Is there an easy way for them to connect to the groups that they're interested in? So all of that marketing piece. Do we have handouts? Do we have cards? We've been talking lately about if you have an SCA card, maybe putting a QR code on the back so that when you hand it to somebody, they can actually scan it and it goes directly to your website and maybe a place for them to join, right, and get your newsletter. So rethinking how we do cards. I'm a big proponent of sign-up sheets too. Oftentimes people in the SCA come to the SCA and we go, hey, we tell them about it. We stand there for 10 minutes. We tell them all about the SCA and then they walk away. Or maybe we give them a card if we're really good about that. And then they walk away and then there's no real way to reconnect with them, right? So they might have even gotten into armor at a fighter practice. We'd be like, that guy was pretty cool. Anybody have their contact number? And we usually don't, right? So having sign-up lists, and people are always pretty open to putting down their email or whatever, and then really checking back with them to say, hey, are you still interested? Have you gotten connected to our newsletter? All of those sort of things. The other thing is demos. I would say that traditionally, we've done a lot of like school demos. We've done demos where we take 1 million tents and pavilions and we build like a medieval village, and 2 days later, we're totally exhausted. People often say, well, did we get anybody from that demo? That sort of thing. So I kind of think demos, I know in my groups, they've kind of stopped doing those demos, but we haven't replaced them with anything else. So I kind of think demos have changed. I think one, when we have events outside, that's become the new demo. So we have a deputy at the kingdom level that is planning to set up a welcome tent so that when new people come by or people stop by the event, we have information to give them. And we have mentors there that can actually give them a little tour of what's going on. So it's almost like our events are the new demos for when people see us at the park doing some sort of an event or at a fighter practice. So having people there and having information there. But I think that we can also be savvy about other things that are going on. So I went to a Toughest Mudder event. My wife was running in it. My daughter was running in it. And so I noticed that there's like 1,000 people here running in teams. And they were dressed up in like superhero costumes and all of these different things. And then I saw a knight from the SCA and he was running with his daughters. And I was like, well, holy cow, we have SCA people here. What if we had a team of like Vikings or something, right? Like dressed up in SCA and they had shields or whatever that could even be made out of foam. And they ran as a team. People would be like, hey, cool, what is this all about? And then you'd have somebody there giving out cards or whatever so that people learn about the SCA. And that's a crowd that's very physical and into doing things, right? So almost like showing up at things in garb, but being ready to connect with people and tell them about our group without taking all the pavilions, without setting up, 2 or 3 days worth of things, but kind of light and easy so that people can see what we're doing. So those are just some of the ideas as far as recruitment, being, I think, imaginative with it, thinking about who are the people in your area, who are the people that might be interested, and really being able to connect with those folks, but really starting to think differently about how we recruit folks. Second is orientation. So to me, orientation is when somebody comes to your website, if somebody messages the group and they are like, oh, I'm interested in joining, like, how do I do this? So really for us as Chatelaines, or even people who run various activities in our group, figuring out how do I orient this person to the group? How do I orient them to the SCA? So being able to be a mentor or have a mentoring group, being able to introduce them to the various people that they might want to meet, the various activities that they want to go to, helping them with the language of the SCA. One of the things, I'll toot the horn for Unserhofen, our Chatelaine has put together a household for new people. They call it the Green Company. And so basically it's a place for people to be able to connect with each other as new folks, but then he also has like little badges for activities that you go to. And so it's like a year-long program, and it helps people to really get oriented in the group. Goliath, no, not Goliath. I was just talking to you about Goliath. Citadel has like a checklist, which is really cool. So it's like, here's the things that you need to do as far as a new person. So what I've been thinking about and starting to work on is kind of a checklist, handbook, scavenger hunt for people, basically like 6 months worth of who do you need to meet, right? So going and meeting the local folks, meeting peers, meeting people who run things. What activities should you go check out? So here are the activities, and really having them get signed off on all of these things. Going to your first local event, going to your first regional event, going to your first kingdom event. So all of those things that really start to help people orient into the SCA. And then also they're working their way towards really becoming like a lord or a lady in the SCA. So they're AOA, right? So what are those things? And I'm stealing part of Citadel's. I want to be able to put in like at 6 months after they've completed X amount of things, that they actually become a mentor for other new people. So, and they call it Silver Key in Citadel. So then that's a part of your checkoff list, is that now you're going to help somebody else through their first 6 months. And then that cycle will help bring people in and orient to the SCA. So third is retention. And so this is an interesting thing. When I worked at other places, they kept a list of their members. So that you could call people and say, hey, we haven't seen you in a while. How are you doing? How can I help out? The SCA is not very good at this. We do have membership lists, but we have half of our people who aren't members. So we aren't keeping track at all of these folks that come and go. And so they'll fall through the cracks, and nobody even knows that so-and-so hasn't shown up for a while. So to me, retention is, who are your people in your group? In the old days, we used to have a phone book with everybody in the group, and then we had a phone tree, and everybody could then call everybody on the phone tree. We haven't done that in a while since Yahoo Groups, where we had a database. So trying to figure out, how do you keep track of people in your group, right? So do you do a phone book? What do you do? But who are the people in your group? And then who are the people that can reach out to those people and make sure that they're doing okay, if they need help, all of those sort of things. I'm just talking about ROAR, so I'm on the retention piece. So keeping track of who's in your group and how are you going to do that, right? So a couple of years ago, we started to practice this as far as the fighters, the heavy fighters in Fort Collins area. And we just started to like write down, who are all of our fighters? Because we only had 2 fighters going to fighter practice. And so then we started to build just a simple database spreadsheet. We collected their information as far as their contact information, but then I also collected like how new, when did they start, what awards they had, so who the knights were, that sort of thing. Then we grew it from like 2 people going to fighter practice to 40 heavies in Unserhofen or Fort Collins area. So just by reaching out and saying, hey, we haven't seen you for a while. And then I had like color-coded people that were kind of falling off the list, people that I needed to really contact, and people who were just going all the time. And I really didn't need to call them or say hello, right? So having the groups really keep track of who are the people in ANS, in service, in heavy, but almost having a database or whatever you want to do as far as keeping track of your people. And then the last one is re-engagement. So reaching out to folks that haven't played in a while, maybe things have changed. We have a gentleman up in Fort Collins who played in the 90s, and then he really got busy with work. And then just recently, because he still knew SCA people, he retired and he's ready to play again. So it's can be intimidating to have played in the past. And then to come back to the SCA, you don't maybe know the same people, or if you're fighting again, you weren't as good as you used to be. So really helping to kind of be gentle with those folks, not just throwing them into things, but really seeing what their interests are, calling folks that you haven't seen in a long time in the SCA and saying, hey, you know, we miss you. Would you like to just come and hang out a little bit? So re-engaging folks that have kind of dropped out over time. So these are big things. There's a lot that can be done with all four of those. So having one person do that in a group is kind of overwhelming. I think the more people, the merrier, the more deputies, the merrier. Having people take one of those chunks. So maybe you have somebody that's in charge of the recruitment marketing piece, and you have somebody else that's in charge of keeping track of who are your people. So the retention piece, right? So almost having teams is to me the future of this office. And so it's not so much an officer, it's an office where we need to have groups of people helping out and really helping with the lifeblood of the SCA, right? Which is how do we keep things going and moving and growing and all of those things. Questions? Bella, welcome. Oh, I muted you.
So I was taking a look at the Kingdom and Carta, and I was looking at SCA. There are a lot of different handouts available. And I think I really agree with, I think it was one of your first points about changing their website so that it's like, boom, right in your face. Here's the information for newcomers and like, you know, better explanations. The people that, people like us that are experienced, we are going to go there for a different reason, and we're not going to stay on the homepage for any amount of time at all. So I think that sounds really good.
So have you been looking at the Karen website to see things that might change? Because I've definitely been working with the Kingdom, and he is like overwhelmed, but he has it planned. But I also worked with the Adenvelt, and they've redone their website, and I think it's a lot clearer, cleaner. And then they've been working on their newcomer section too. I haven't looked at Karen
and almost like that. It's like, yeah, we should have a big logo and some pictures and stuff like that, but then the information on the homepage needs to be completely directed at newcomers. It shouldn't be like, you know, hey, here's our event schedule, or like, you know, anything like that. It needs to be like, basically the newcomer page needs to be the homepage, right? And it needs to be organized in a much more modern, like user-friendly way. So those are definitely things I was thinking about. I was also thinking about all of these Facebook pages. I know some of them are official, unofficial, and just getting a handle on that. So working with the social media officer on like, hey, which ones are official that we can list on the homepage, and then we need to maybe make like a Care to Newcomers Facebook group and say, here's like resources, pinned post at the top with like links, you know, just like on the newcomers website. Make it a little bit more social media incorporated, I think is like a better way to reach like younger people. And then
so you might even about the demos together, and how you might even put together like a marketing crew. So you, the web minister, the social media person, and the newsletter person, right? We don't do this in the SCA where we say, what's our marketing plan for the year, right? Like, what is our goal? Do we have a through theme for everything that we're doing, right? Are we on the same page? Are we sending people to the right places? So pulling those people together kind of as a crew that you talk to once a month or whatever would be a thing.
Like literally a propaganda machine. Like we literally need a propaganda machine. Yeah. We are the first level of PR like that most people meet. Like if we do our jobs well, virtually every person over the course of like 5 years should have had experience with a Chatelaine. Like we are the front line, immediate face of the SCA, like on the ground level. And I think that's really, really important to consider, you know, like, so working with social media and the web pages and all that stuff is, I mean, it's really sad that it hasn't happened yet, you know, like it can, but it hasn't yet. So I I think
Well, the
that
thing is,
having
we've got these
consistent
business
messaging was
meetings.
good.
Oh yeah, great. We've got these business meetings, and I've been to a few of them when I lived in Unserhofen, but it literally is, it's all about money. I didn't have any like discussion about like planning of events, planning of this propaganda machine like you're talking about. Hey, like, has anyone looked at the website lately? There's this huge like, 401 error.
Yeah.
I didn't hear any content discussion at all. It was all money, 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 money. But it's a business meeting. It should be. But we should be meeting other times to discuss, brainstorming, and like working together, communication between Chronicler, social media website, Chatelaine. Like we all need to be working together at a different type of meeting.
Well, I mean, marketing is absolutely to do with business, though. Like it has a place in that discussion. Yeah. It just needs to be like made there,
A time and a space.
Sure.
Yeah, like we used to do. Were you on the stewards group, Lisette?
I don't think so, no.
So we in Unserhofen, we did this thing with autocrating too, because often the autocrat, it was so overwhelming to be the autocrat, right? And to get enough people, and there's so much pressure. So we said, let's have a stewards guild. So let's have people that, because it's almost always very similar people that need to be involved. Let's also have a place where new people can come in who are interested. And so we would have that as a separate meeting. And eventually, like Bella is saying, it became like before the officers meeting or after the officers meeting, but it kind of had its own place, right? So I could actually see that as a breakout, maybe after an officers meeting, and it's on the schedule, right, for the local meeting.
Yeah.
But then it was a crew of people that would put together events. And then it took a lot of pressure off of individuals, and then we could also mentor people. So yeah, having this is the discussion, and this is what we're working on, and really here's the plan. We don't have that very often, but here's the plan for the next year, right?
And the goal is to accomplish the plan, and that matter.
Okay.
Yeah. And like the other thing I was thinking about as far as the demos, because the basically the SCA website Chatelaine information is like, hey, is it really worth doing a demo at a kindergarten? I know that that's like the most fun, but are you going to recruit any members from a bunch of kindergartners? No, you're not. So that's that falls in a different category than like a recruitment demo. That's like, community outreach, helping children, education demo.
Right.
But what we need to do is go to those axe throwing bars. I'm actually going to Drakkar Meadery tomorrow with a Tolkien group.
Yeah.
And like, that's the kind of thing we need to do. We need to do an SCA takeover, not a Tolkien takeover, and go in garb to places like meaderies, axe throwing. I don't know, we can brainstorm at one of these, like, I don't know what to call the other, like the working meeting where we're going to like the propaganda machine. I like that word. So
yeah, well, I mean, very literally, very literally.
Stephanie, when did you come in on my talk? Did you come in? Stephanie, when did you come in on my talk? Did you come in when I was talking about recruitment?
I've been here the whole time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So you're right. So that's the same thing I was talking about with Toughest Mutter, right? So, yeah, going to axe bars, going places in garb, doing kind of what I would say is low key. We're not taking a bunch of stuff, but we're going as a group, and we have stuff to give to people. So I think you're exactly right on that.
I still want to do some farmers market booths too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a great idea. But this is the thing, like we can divvy up the list, we can brainstorm the list, we can divvy up the list, we can say, okay, I actually want to go to the farmers market and shop, so like, yes, I will set up a booth, and like, if someone can come relieve me for half an hour so I can shop, we can make the load like easier, like distribute the work and things. I know for equestrian, because that's like a big thing with us is recruitment and retention, because I think there were like 4 of us when I started.
Yeah, there's a lot now.
I made little cards. Yeah, I made little cards that had like a cute picture, and then like just like our list of Facebook pages, and it seemed to work really well. We actually got quite a few people from that. But I was like, I'm just going to keep these in my purse, and when I go to horse shows, maybe I'll have a sword with me and someone will ask me about it, because that's how I got recruited. Was I was in that nerd coffee shop up in Unserhofen, and I can't remember who it was. It was Cornelis and and they had a sword on the table. And so I sat at the table next to them and just eavesdropped for a while. And then eventually I was like, hey guys, what's up? With the sword. And so they gave me the spiel, and I was like, oh, you know what? I had tried SCA in college. I didn't like the group down in Florida. And so I didn't stick around, but we can also learn from that. Why don't people stick around? And I know I got, physically harassed. So, like, we just need to, hey, who are the people that someone shows up to fighter practice for the first time? Who's the first person that talks to them? Make sure it's someone nice.
Yeah, or that we train our people, right? So I would say in that too, that especially anybody that's a lord or lady in the SCA should be building their skills in hospitality, right? So teaching our people the things that we should say, right? So I always tell people, you should always ask if people have heard of the SCA before, before you go into your spiel, because you might be talking to some old Duke or Duchess that just walked up in their mundane clothes, right? So really, those are things that we can do to teach our populace. I just put a little link of a paper that I wrote in the chat. But what it also reminds me of too, Stephanie, is that testing out things, right? So testing something out as far as a demo, and then kind of recording and saying, like, did it work? Did it not? What's the feedback, right? So keeping some data about what's working and what's not. Because a lot of times in the SCA, I think we just try stuff, but we don't ever like record like how successful. And then somebody's like, I think, you always hear this, I don't think we got anybody from that. And then people who are sitting there like, oh, actually, I started from that, right? Because nobody's actually like keeping track of the data. So trying things out on a small scale before we have to like try it and we're like, it's overwhelming, trying things on a small scale. And then if it works, we can ramp it up. But then also keeping track of what's working and what's not, or what's the feedback, I think would be a huge thing.
We have a lot of that down in Alberon, and the city puts on a big Ren fair every year. And I don't think we realized how many young 20-somethings we were getting from the Ren fair. And there's a lot of young folk that's where that may not be where they joined, but that's where they first saw us. And then they're like, let me go and find.
Well, that's a whole different purpose then too, right? So what do they call that? Like getting your brand out there, having people know the name. So once upon a time in the SCA, that was the only game in town. And so that's where I heard of the SCA, was at the Renaissance Festival in Larkspur when I was 10. I didn't join the Ren Fair, or I didn't join the SCA, but I always remembered SCA. I didn't even know what that stood for. So then I went to college, and then we went to the Ren Fair out in Kansas City and saw the SCA. And then when I moved to Fort Collins, it's like, we've been wanting to do the SCA my whole life. And it was me and my buddy. And so we found the local group, and it was tough. They weren't in the phone book. There wasn't the internet, right? So it was tough to find them. And I was like, what are you guys doing? We can't even find you. But we found the group, and then we joined. So we had seen it before. And so back then, the SCA was the only game in town as far as like medieval stuff. So now there's, of course, LARPing and AmpGuard and all of these other groups to kind of compete with people's attention. And because we are not out there as much as we used to, the name SCA isn't as heard as much, right? So it sounds like what's happening there in Alberon is at least they're getting the name out there so that the young people are like, ooh, this looked really cool. And I can't join now, but maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, I always remember that. Now I know where to go look, and now I can join the group. So some demos might not be about recruitment as much, but just about getting our name out there. So probably at cons, that would be a good place to do that, right? Any sort of place where all the people that are kind of geeks and nerds that are out there are going, oh, I heard of this group, right? And they're pretty cool. And maybe I can't join now, but at least I know the name in my head.
Right. And then another thing is our brand. Like, what is our brand? What sets us apart from the Ren Fair? What sets us apart from LARP? And those are things maybe I need a little help with because I don't know very much about AmpGuard. But during one of those propaganda machine meetings, we can have some spiel ready. Oh, you were in AmpGuard and you left because of this reason? Well, SCA does things differently in these ways. Right. That kind of thing. Like, we need to establish what is our brand here, like in comparison to our comparables.
Right.
Well, I mean, also people can like, let's say, oh, you play Amp Guard, we do this too. So how about come and try that out also, you know?
Also.
Like, I'm not really big on the word or, I'm much
Mhm.
more into the word and, just as a rule. And I actually have something for that. Like, what is our relevance, right? Because like that's really the big thing. When I started in the SCA, it was like the late 90s in Alberon, right? And it was like I thought of it as an SCA heyday. Apparently, a little bit before that, it was even like a bigger thing than it was then. Like Blathewyn was huge. I played at the college group there, and it was awesome. And I was into it because it was nerdy, and there were costumes, and I could like wander around campfires dancing. It was amazing, and I had never experienced anything like it in my life. But like now, I took a 10-year hiatus, and then I came back. I'm a resurrection, right? I brought myself back to the game, and I looked around and I'm like, wow, all of my friends are like old and like, what's going on? We're doing all these events at like churches and libraries. And that's not necessarily bad. It's just that like it was a much smaller population and it was a little more tame, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But like one thing that the last year has taught me, if anything else is that we are more relevant to society in general now than we have ever been. I mean, like, think about it last year, you know, people were trying to learn things like baking bread from things they were growing in their refrigerator and like learning how to do various crafts and whatever. And like, we are one of those organizations where if you just want to learn some basic survival shit, how to make a shield wall, you know, like you can come to us and learn that. Like, we are more culturally relevant than we have been in 20 years. Now we just need to get that foot forward so that it is obvious to people who are not us. And,
Well,
and when I say propaganda machine, that's what I'm talking about.
Well, that's the thing, right? So makers, so they have maker spaces, maker
Totally.
fairs. So I went to a maker fair, thousands of people there, right? And so there's all these groups and they're makers. And I was like, where's our SCA? Like, we're the OG makers, right? Like, we should have
Seriously.
all of our artists. But you know who was there? Steampunk folks were there.
Those are fun.
And it was like, well, Steampunk's here, but the SCA is not here. So yeah, I think across the board, everybody kind of agrees that getting people together and starting to think about how do we reach out, where do we reach out, what seems smart, what are the groups, what are the niches, how are we going to do this, having a team to think about that and to make a plan would be huge for each of the groups.
And then even more importantly, we need to make a good showing. Like, I'm a huge fan of coming up with some more materials as far as, you know, flyers, websites, booklets, what have you. Like, I mean, it seems a little antiquated now, but like, we are anachronists, so it's very on brand for us to that extent. But like, in general though, if we're gonna go out there and put ourselves out there, we need to make a good showing. It is better to not have a party than to have one that is badly attended, right? And I'm not talking about events. I mean, we talk just about like the public facing stuff. Like, even if there's only 4 of us going to a thing, like, we need to put on a really strong display. It's like, you want to come hang out with us without being a dick about it. But
well, part of that is having the right people face front. So
yes,
that's super important.
absolutely.
There's been some incidents on the Facebook pages lately that kind of shocked me a little bit, and I was like, wow, these people should not be facing front. And
yeah.
Well, you know what, we just need to talk about it, and people should be willing to hear feedback on stuff like that. I don't think it should just be talked about behind their backs. I think, you know, like Derek said, like Alexander said, you know, discussion, education, like, hey, let's talk about what happened there and like how we can handle that situation better in the future if it happens again. You know,
we are adults and we can use our words.
Absolutely, it should be not stigmatized to get, not like a reprimand, but like educated. You know, but I think like so for instance, Sir Alexander went to this makers market. Maybe at our propaganda machine meetings, he would have mentioned, hey, by the way, next weekend or in 2 months, I'm going to go to this makers market. Can I have one other person, you know, help me so that I can walk around and you can walk around? 2 people's the minimum. You can't have one for sure.
Totally.
And then what I was thinking about, I haven't been officially like elected or whatever as Chatelaine, but my plan is I'd love to have some donated pieces of like A&S stuff with cards permanently attached to them, like huge cards with like, here's a picture of the person that made it, like in garb doing something like weaving. So let's use like a piece of cloth, for instance, like hand woven cloth.
Yeah.
Here's this beautiful hand woven piece of cloth. It belongs to our propaganda machine now. Like they're never going to ask for it back. And then attached to it permanently is the card. So someone can pick it up and then instantly have all the information about it, a picture of the person that made it, doing it in garb, looking awesome. And that would be its own little piece of propaganda right there.
You know who's really good at that is fucking Eleanor. She's really good at that stuff. She does making stuff in garb all the time. I mean, she's an Antier now, but maybe we could like steal some of her pictures or something for the moment till we make some. Because she's so good at it.
We can have like a brainstorming meeting at the propaganda machine, because that's like one example, but like all the metalworking. And so I went through the pictures that are available on the SCA website, like that everyone's given their release for. There are some people making stuff, and I was like, that's a great picture of a guy doing something. And then there was a terrible picture of a guy doing metalworking, shirtless, belly out, sunglasses on. And I'm like, no, guys, like, why is this even included in this group of propaganda pictures?
Totally.
Let's work on this. So like
we appreciate your contribution, but maybe let's reframe it.
Let's stage some photos. Let's get some stuff like that out there. That's one of the projects that I was going to work on right at first, is like just looking at stuff I've got. And, you know, let's make a small pile right now and do that. And then like people will be excited to donate to it, I think. We
could talk to Conliac and Rachel Rogers, right? Because Conliac, Rachel Rogers, and Bree Pye, I think it is, are like 3 pretty prolific photographers of events in the Outlands. And if anybody is going to have some good shots of people doing cool shit, it's them.
Oh, we already have the But I think this brings us to one of the core points. And so in that thing that I posted, it's called story bonding in the chat. One of the core concepts of Aria.
I would really not use the word propaganda machine
with
the
conversation. This is a private meeting
going on. Well, no, I mean, guys, think about it.
Right.
If we already have in some circles a reputation, and with some of the things that are happening in other kingdoms right now, the word propaganda is probably a word you want to avoid.
This is a private meeting.
I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah. As people use the term.
As someone who lives in a very public-facing world mundanely, there are words that we probably don't want to use.
Nice.
I totally see where you're coming from. This is a private meeting, but in all seriousness, I have kind of my own dialect, and I use words like propaganda machine and cults in a very non-politically charged kind of way, of course. But like, this is not a public thing right now, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not talking to a new person in a thing. I am slightly mindful of that sort of thing, especially in the places that we live, but I hear you though.
This does bring me to this point though, and it's in the paper, that you keep the hero or the participant in mind when you're doing all these things, right? So sometimes in the SCA, who we keep in mind is like our members. So that's why all of our websites, almost all of our things that are going on as far as online stuff is like geared towards the members, right? So people that have been in for a while. So having us really think about who are our new people. So it reminds me, we went and did this demo at a game shop, right? And so it was for Magic, like a bunch of Magic users, right? Magic the game. And so everybody in the SCA went in their best armor, right? And all of this stuff. And I remember we were doing this fighting demo, and I remember looking over at the participants of the Magic stuff. And they were looking at us almost horrified. They were like, these people are hitting each other with sticks and their armor looks really expensive. And it was always like, there's no way I'm going to join this group, right? So even though we showed our best selves, we should have been doing that at like an MMA gym, not at a Magic user group. We probably should have been like taking like medieval games, which they probably would have really got into, maybe some A&S stuff, which they would probably be like, oh, that's really cool that they're crafting. So knowing our audience and knowing who needs to go represent and show our best self. So I think just every step of the way when it comes to like all of these things for Roar is knowing like who is your audience and how do we show them the folks that they might most be interested in, right? So we don't want to show up at like a medieval craft fair up in Estes Park with people who are doing things that don't have to do maybe with crafts. So just something to think about. And so, yeah, Stephanie, if you get a chance, read that document, because I think that'll help with just some of how we think about that, like our story, what is the story we're telling people? What are we inviting people into? All of those sort of things. I know that Bella's taken a look at that already.
Yeah, because it's not one story. It is, I mean, I say often that there are as many ways to play SCA as there are people in it, and a lot more than that, frankly. It is a lot of stories. So I think if we can like really focus in on kind of, you know, a handful of really major ones for like any of the new materials that we're going to be putting out to distribute to the public, that would be good, you know. Back in the day, the big thing, of course, was fighting. And it's still definitely a bigger part, but like, especially in the current climate, like our A&S stuff is huge. So I think that there's definitely something to be said for that there. Making stuff and fighting. I love that making stuff is so much more important now, but like, there's so many different things to do. And so that does make it a little bit more challenging to try to narrow in on, you know, those things to initially focus on.
Well, I think so. There's some overarching ones, right? Which is one is like an escape from modern world, right? You're working your crappy job or whatever, you're doing your normal politics, and the SCA can be a place where you have a name and you get to go do things. So I think that is a good overarching one. I think what you said earlier, Bella, about like the original makers, like as a place to go and learn original skills, that sort of
thing. Learn how to do stuff. Totally.
Yeah, learning how to do stuff. I know that we've had young people recently, like they came to practice and they brought like a round shield, a Viking round shield that he made in shop class, right? Neat. So people who want to like do things with their hands, I think that's a great overarching theme. The idea of chivalry. So some of the other groups like Dagger here, they don't have this idea of like chivalry and how we treat each other. I think that's a great overarching theme. Community. We have
community's huge.
We are great at like levels of community. Extraordinary like events. So being able to go to things like wars and stuff, other groups don't have maybe some of those big things. So we do have some overarching. So yeah, it always starts with asking the questions, right? Like where are they kind of interested in, and then crafting your story to help them, invite them into something that they get excited about.